following is another Python tutorial, leading up to being able to use Python in ArcGIS. As I say before, each of these, remember, I'm not a programmer or a coder. My experience and knowledge with Python is largely contained towards its use in ArcGIS, and just because of enjoyment with it, I've been able to teach myself and learn a little bit more outside of this context. But I really want to structure these videos here, for those who want to have a very basic conversational understanding and then eventually translate it into ArcGIS. So yeah, that's the goal of these videos. But before we can get to ArcGIS and how we use ArcPy, have a series of videos just kind of understanding some basic concepts in Python. This video here is sort of like a compendium video to the one where we deal with ifs and fors and whiles, so conditionals or loops. And it's just to run through three words that you'll encounter often in Python, and that's continue, break, and pass. And they all do three entirely different things, and I want to use this script hopefully to be able to demonstrate what they are. Notice that there's some interesting red here. That's temporarily in red because I'm going to bring it out later to be able to demonstrate this script, or sorry, to demonstrate component of the script, but for now it just looks like an annotation. So break, continue, and pass, really what it does, if I go and I run it, it asks the user to enter a phrase. We'll keep it simple here. We'll say breaks, continues, and passes. Right, it tells you that it's iterated through and it's been able to count from this sentence that there are 15 consonants and that there are 9 vowels. Right, so that's essentially what happens here. It's defined a function which will count the number of consonants and vowels, and then it's run that function at the end down here. So there's we'll walk through one by one just so we can understand the basic concept of the script before I really start introducing the difference between pass, continue, and break. So really this is going to be the focus of this video on this row here, but I want to provide a little context. Right, so in order to be able to test that there are vowels and consonants, it just creates a list of vowels and a list of consonants to check against. It knows it's eventually going to count, so it starts a counter for each at 0. And this simply stores what the user is going to input. Put an uppercase method at the end of it, just so in case the user, like I did, inputs something that's lowercase, I can just get it all uppercase so it checks accurately against here. Right, but the big interesting part of the script that does the meat here is in the for. And as a reminder from the for videos, right, for whatever, right, that could be anything. X, each letter, next, row, comb, gummy snack. Really its whole purpose here is to say, for the iteration, whatever you're iterating through, a list of objects, a string character, a list, I am temporarily, for each iteration, holding one value, right? So in this instance, it was breaks, continue, and passes. So each letter went through and became B, the first iteration, then it was R, then it was E, then it was A, then it was K, then it was S. And so each time one of those letters popped in, it simply asked a question. Hey, are you in the vowel list? And if you were, we raised the vowel counter by 1, so we knew there was 1 vowel. You in the consonants list? If you are, you raise the consonants counter by 1. If you're neither a vowel or a consonant, which for this purpose means you're a space or a question mark or a digit or any other character that's not simply alphabetic, then in this instance you just pass, right? And pass essentially means do nothing, right? So essentially do nothing. And really there's nothing to do yet, so there's no real reason for pass to come into play yet, but it will in a second, and we'll see exactly what I mean. And then once the for is complete, right, notice that this print remains on the same indentation here as for. So what I always say about fors and whiles and ifs, right, unless you use a statement called break, right, which is the end of this video, everything that is subservient or indented beneath the for, the while, or the if must conclude before the entire for loop can conclude. So it's got to go through each of these letters, and then it can get to print, where it prints how many iterations, how many consonants, how many vowels, and then the script runs, right, because this is all just defining it. And this is just a trick to keep everything up, in command line until you hit enter. So to make things a little bit more, kind of understandable here, I'm going to, just open something up really quick here. And I'm going to open that up. So now when we do encounter a space, it's at least going to tell us that we've encountered a space. And not only that, I'm also putting something in line with the if, the elif, and the else. So I want you to know here, and this is really critical, this print statement is not subservient to the else, it's not subservient to the elif, it's not subservient to the if. It is in line with them. So therefore, each letter is going to test if it's a vowel, then it's going to test if it's a consonant. If it's neither of those, it's going to do what's under else, and then it's going to come here. Now there is going to be one exception to that, and that's when we talk about continue. But the point that I'm trying to make here is when you see this equal, don't think it's just if else happens this will print, or just if. In any iteration, this is going to print. And effectively what it's going to do is just count for us, so we can see how we proceed through this sentence here. The number of total letters we encounter, the number of vowels, and the number of consonants. So I'll save it. We'll run our module. We'll enter the same phrase, breaks, continues, and passes. Right, and now we have something that we can start to work with a little bit more. Okay, right? So the first letter that it went through here, and it actually, just to make this one a little easier, let's just change this sentence a little bit here, and we'll say first letter is, and we'll say each letter, and we'll say total letters, right? Just a small little change here. Save that. Get ourselves some little space down here, and then we'll run it again. All right, so same thing, breaks, continues, that's what it was, breaks, continues, and passes. All right, now we have a little bit something nicer to work with. Let's stretch it out so it's easier to see. Okay, boom. All right, so really that's the iteration of it all. That's essentially what's happening here. Your first letter is a B, right? Because we put in breaks, continues, and passes. So the first letter was a B. And that's why when it ends that statement, it prints first letter is a B, right? This happens at the end of every iteration. So it goes through each one, B, then R, then E, then A, then K, then S. And because I'm iteratively counting the number of vowels and the consonants, those are growing. Right? So eventually we are going to get to this point where we're at the S in breaks. All right, we have a total of 6 letters that we've done, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There have been 4 consonants, B, R, K, and S, and 2 vowels, excuse me, E and A. And then after that, it's going to go into the 7th iteration. And remember, when you enter a string segment, every character is a part of that string, so the space is part of that string. So it's going to get to a space. And when it does the space, right, it's going to say, hey, space, are you in vowels? Of course I'm not in vowels, I'm a space. Hey, space, are you in consonants? Of course I'm not in consonants, I'm a space. So it gets down here to the else, and it will print for us that we have encountered a space, right? Not only is it going to say that we've encountered a space, but it still goes then here to this next row. And it prints for me that the letter is, well, no letter, right? It was a space. It's showing you that the letter for this instance happened to be a space, and therefore the total letter count, the total consonant count, the total vowel count remain unchanged from where they were previously. This continues down the entire part of the script, excuse me, until you eventually get down to the last letter right here. So let's change this up very slightly, and I want to show something called continue here. Right? Continue is going to change what this script does, and I want people to see if they can notice off the bat how it changes it and where that change comes from. So I'm going to go to run. I'm going to run the module. I'm going to type in the same thing, breaks, continues, and passes. And at first glimpse, it's going to look pretty much the same, right? So take a look here. See if you can scroll back and forth between the two, right, up and down maybe. Let's make this just a little longer so that we can try to get some of the similar things from one into the other. Right, so you can kind of see and passes really helps there. And notice, right, always the real change always comes from the else, right, because that's when you encounter a space. In our first iteration here, when we had break, you encountered a space, right, and then after you encountered the space, you simply went on to the next thing that was in line with the if, elif, and else statements, and you printed that the first letter is a, well, heck, this letter is a space, so it's a space, and the total remains unchanged from the row above. Notice you don't do that here. So what continue means is when it's encountered in a for statement or a while statement, it simply means continue on to the next iteration. So it's effectively saying if you find something that you like or it does something that you want it to do, just ignore whatever comes after it. I don't have to do this print right here because I've heard continue. Continue means like skip that, and since you're not yet out of the for loop, come back up and do the next part of your for, right? So that's why you don't get this row here that's talking about a space, because the continue after the else, when you would have a space, won't go to this line right here, but rather go back up to the next letter, which happens to be P-A-S-S-E-S. Right, so last one here is break. Right, and let's see what break does for us. File save. We're going to run the module, and we're going to run the last thing. We're going to say breaks, continues, and passes. Right, and so that ran interestingly there. Sorry about that. I'm not sure why that occurred at the top there. All right, but when I run it, everything seems normal through the B, the R, the E, the A, the K, and the S. Now, granted, right, to remind you, we always have included the pass, the continue, or the break within the else statement. So no matter what, this was always going to occur once we get to the first space, and that's what happens here. Now it gets to a space, because it doesn't find it in vowels, it doesn't find it in consonants. It prints that we've encountered that space, and then it breaks. And so what that means is break out of whatever for or while loop is containing you. Right? So it doesn't go on to the next letter, which would be, the C and continues like we've seen here. It simply breaks out of the for iteration, like almost like going back up to here, and then finds whatever was in the same indentation, and it happens to be the print iteration is now complete. Because we only went through the first word, we only have 4 consonants and we only have 2 vowels.